Chingwana knew that it was not as simple as fighting upon seeing her daughter's expression. She glared at him. Hanju felt a little awkward under her gaze and said, I want Chinger to participate in the chaotic assembly, so I'm being stricter. Chaotic assembly? Chingwana and Han Chinger were both interested. Hanju didn't hide anything. After all, Han Chinger had already attained the Tao. There was no benefit in hiding anymore. Instead, it would attract unnecessary consequences. He only mentioned the information regarding the chaotic assembly and introduced the great Tao divine spirits. He did not mention the rest. Han Chinger had heard of the chaotic assembly in the Universal Hall. She didn't expect it to be so exciting and grand. She immediately became excited. I want to participate. I want to participate. Han Chinger seemed humiliated upon hearing this. She said indignantly, Mother, you underestimate me. Besides, the chaotic assembly is being jointly held by Father and the leader of the divine spirits. Who dares to kill me? Then, Chingwana looked at her father in surprise. Hanju said seriously, don't think like that. You might really die. Justice will be lost if the chaotic assembly is corrupted by the higher-ups. You have to be prepared to die as long as you want to participate. Han Chinger was silent. Chingwana hurriedly dissuaded her. No, I want to participate. I'm my father's daughter. How can I be mediocre? My elder brother can wander around and make a name for himself. Why can't I? Also, my second brother is not even born yet and has been nurtured for millions of years. What talent is this? Mother, my second brother will definitely shock the world when he's born. Do you want me to be the weakest in our family? Han Chinger said seriously. Her stubborn and strong-minded appearance was quite similar to Hanju's. Chingwana said, Silly child, if aren't you the weakest, who will be? You're the youngest, after all. Han Chinger immediately felt defeated. Hanju was amused. This mother and daughter always bickered like sisters. Back then, Chingwana doted on Han Tua in every way and had never said anything to attack him. Of course, their mother-son relationship was not as close as the mother-daughter relationship. All right, prepare to listen to the Tao. Hanju waved his sleeve and said. This sentence also entered the ears of all the disciples in the third Tao field. Everyone excitedly gathered. On the barren star, Jiang Juesher and Liu Bei sat on the cliff. Jiang Juesher opened his eyes and exhaled. Liu Bei did not open his eyes. What's wrong? Liu Bei opened his eyes and stared at him. He pondered for a moment and said, Your great reincarnation creation technique is endless and profound, but it didn't create a great Tao that belongs to you alone. Cultivation is based on the great Tao after attaining the Tao. How can you cultivate without the great Tao? Jiang Juesher said helplessly, How can the great Tao be so easy to create? Liu Bei hesitated for a moment and asked, Should I ask that senior? Jiang Juesher narrowed his eyes. That senior was the hidden mighty figure in this universe. Because of his experience in the human school, Jiang Juesher was very resistant to joining others. However, he also knew that he had to have a backing if he wanted to cultivate in the chaos. How strong one's backing determined the distance one could walk. You don't have to worry. That senior doesn't need you to risk your life. Besides, you're not qualified. He's even stronger than ordinary great Tao divine spirits in the chaos. Liu Bei shook his head and smiled. Jiang Juesher was moved. So powerful? A great Tao divine spirit was almost equivalent to a great Tao sage. Liu Bei nodded. Jiang Juesher struggled for a moment before finally agreeing. Liu Bei immediately closed his eyes and sent a voice transmission to the third Tao field. Hanju immediately replied, Let him continue cultivating and wait for my seclusion to end. Liu Bei told him the truth. Jiangjuesher nodded and heaved a sigh of relief. The other party was mainly in seclusion, which meant that he did not care about him that much. Thus, he wouldn't scheme against him. Jiangjuesher glanced at Liu Bei gratefully. The latter had given him a residence and a huge opportunity. Such a good brother was rare in life. Hanju left quietly and returned to the Taoist temple to continue cultivating. As for Jiangjuesher, he would wait for a while to prevent this kid from suspecting anything. Another 100,000 years passed just like that. Jiangjuesher was already anxious. He asked Liu Bei again, "How long will that senior be in seclusion?" Liu Bei opened his eyes and said helplessly, "How would I know?" Jiangjuesher sighed. He had been looking forward to it ever since he started thinking about this, but the other party did not appear. He had thought that the other party was after his talent. But it was ridiculous now that he thought about it. In the eyes of mighty figures, he was probably inferior to Liu Bei. Talent was only potential. Cultivation was the true capital. How can the path of cultivation be impatient? You endured hundreds of thousands of reincarnations. Why did your personality change after stopping? A voice floated over, startling the two of them. A figure stood on the hill behind. His entire body shone with divine light, making it impossible to see his true appearance. Liu Bei immediately knelt. Jiangjuesher understood that the other party was the mighty figure Liu Bei had mentioned. However, how does he know about my past? Jiangjuesher panicked. Hanju chuckled and said, "I know what you're thinking. It will be as easy as flipping your palm to see through a person's past and future when you attain the Great Tao. Your experience might be unique in the heavenly Tao, but it's nothing in the chaos." Jiangjuesher took a deep breath and bowed. "I was rude earlier. Senior, please forgive me. My Great Tao contains the principles of the 3,000 Great Tao. Are you willing to cultivate it?" Hanju asked. He had already used the supreme power to isolate the universe of stars. No one could spy on him. Perhaps only a Tao creator could. It should not be surprising in the eyes of a Tao creator. Jiangjuesher hesitated. Hanju said, "Many people have already cultivated this Tao. There's no lack of great Tao sages. You don't have to worry. You can also listen to the Tao before making a decision." Jiangjuesher nodded and hurriedly thanked him. Hanju began to preach. This lecture lasted for 10,000 years. The lecture ended. Jiangjuesher slowly opened his eyes and looked at Hanju with reverence. "What a profound great Tao! Thank you for your lecture, Senior. This Tao is indeed impressive. I'm willing to cultivate this Tao. Senior, please allow me." Jiangjuesher stood up and bowed sincerely. Hanju said, "The previous lecture was already enough for you to cultivate for some time. I'll guide you when you attain the Great Tao." With that, he vanished. Jiangjuesher was stunned. He didn't expect the other party to leave so quickly. Liu Bei also came to a realization and smiled. "To be willing to take out 10,000 years to preach the Tao to you, it seems that this senior still thinks highly of you. I've never listened to the Tao for so long." Jiangjuesher was very happy and was no longer vigilant upon hearing this. Jiangjuesher was no longer worried. He was so vigilant in the past because he was afraid that the other party would covet it. Then, the two of them continued to meditate and cultivate. In a world, the forest rose and fell. The sky was high and the sea was far away. A majestic mountain towered into the clouds. At the top of the mountain was a huge peacock. It was even larger than the entire mountain. The surrounding sea of clouds looked small in front of it. A beam of light sped over and stopped in front of the huge peacock. A burly man in black armor and a phoenix-winged iron crown appeared after the light dissipated. The black-armored man cupped his fists and bowed. Divine Lord, I learned that the 5 great divine punishers have entered the ancient desolate for some time. The huge peacock was Divine Lord Peacock. Divine Lord Peacock slowly opened his eyes and asked, "What about the situation in the ancient desolate?" "There's no movement for now. The phenomenon you mentioned has never appeared, either." Divine Lord Peacock closed his eyes. It was unknown what he was thinking. The black-armored man couldn't help but ask, "Divine Lord, what are you waiting for?" Divine Lord Peacock said casually, "The ancient desolate contains a huge opportunity. Why did the 5 great divine punishers enter? It's because the ancient desolate is powerful enough. I even suspect that the Tao ancestor is hiding there." The black-armored man nodded. The ancient desolate was formed by the Tao ancestor. The Tao ancestor captured many experts and suppressed them in the ancient desolate in the past. He paused and asked in surprise, "But you still didn't say what you were waiting for." Divine Lord Peacock opened his eyes and stared coldly at the black-armored man, scaring him so much that he hurriedly lowered his head. "Just to keep an eye on him. You'll definitely benefit in the future," Divine Lord Peacock said coldly, scaring the black-armored man so much that he hurriedly nodded. Then, the black-armored man bowed and left. Divine Lord Peacock stared in the direction he had left in deep thought. "Forbidden Lord, oh Forbidden Lord. I can only contribute like this if you don't contact me," Divine Lord Peacock thought helplessly. He thought that the Dark Forbidden Lord was dissatisfied with him. He had attained the Great Tao too slowly. Previously, he had even caused trouble and had to be personally saved by the Dark Forbidden Lord. Divine Lord Peacock's eyes became firm. He had to obtain that treasure. Why would he worry about not being able to help the Dark Forbidden Lord after obtaining it? Although Divine Lord Peacock did not know what the Dark Forbidden Lord's great ambition was, it was definitely related to the entire chaos. More than 10 sages gathered in the Universal Hall. Most sages had their own responsibilities. It was very difficult for all of them to be in the Heavenly Tao at the same time. Cultivators were not afraid of being attacked by sages and existences above with the Heavenly Tao's protection. Although it was not absolutely safe, they could at least avoid many troubles. As many sages were moved at the mention of the Ancient Desolate. The Ancient Desolate was the most frequently mentioned in the chaos. They each had their own forces. Many disciples wandered in the chaos and naturally had this information. Even sages already had their eyes on that supreme treasure. Pan Xian smiled. Heavenly Venerate wants to snatch this treasure? Heavenly Venerate Shen Du shook his head. On the contrary, I want to remind you that you can't go to the Ancient Desolate. Also, that supreme treasure can't be stolen. The new sage, Yang Tiandong, couldn't help but ask, why? He had just attained the Tao and had swept away his previous depression. He was filled with motivation and wanted to achieve something, so he also targeted the Ancient Desolate. The other sages also looked puzzled. Heavenly Venerate Xian Du replied, I've calculated that the Ancient Desolate will cause a calamity. We might endanger the Heavenly Tao if we're not careful. Threaten the Heavenly Tao? The sages were in an uproar. The South Extreme Heavenly Venerate chuckled. Heavenly Venerate, isn't this too exaggerated? Could there be 30,000 Divine Authority Generals hidden in the Ancient Desolate? The sages also laughed. Visit NOVUBIN, CM for the L-test updates, that's right. How could the Heavenly Tao be in danger with the Divine Might Heavenly Sage around? Heavenly Venerate Shen Du said, everyone, don't forget the Tao Ancestor. Pango has revived. As for the Tao Ancestor, whose fate is unknown, are you sure he's dead? Are you going to give way if the Tao Ancestor returns and wants to regain control of the Heavenly Tao? The atmosphere in the hall was oppressive again when the Tao Ancestor was mentioned. The South Extreme Heavenly Venerate, Pan Xin, and Yang Tiandong stopped talking. Heavenly Venerate Xian Du was about to speak when a great pressure descended from the sky. It was a pillar of light that pierced through the 33rd heaven and landed in front of the Universal Hall. It passed through the layers of clouds and landed in a mortal world below the immortal world. The sages were shocked. What's that? What a terrifying pressure. It's a great Tao sage. Wait, why did it fall from above? That pillar of light actually fell into a mortal body. Heavenly Venerate Xian Du frowned. He counted with his fingers and his expression changed drastically. He actually couldn't deduce it. He even panicked. This was a feeling he had never felt before. What happened? 3 figures appeared in the hall at this moment. They were Great Sage Void Soul, the Foolish Sword Sage, and Red Fate. What was that just now? The Foolish Sword Sage asked in a low voice. He was also shocked. Heavenly Venerate Xian Du frowned and asked, "You can't deduce it, either?" The Foolish Sword Sage was the strongest existence in the Heavenly Tao other than the Divine Might Heavenly Sage. Red Fate also looked at the Foolish Sword Sage in surprise. The gazes of the sages made the Foolish Sword Sage even more displeased. His eyes became colder as he turned to look at the mortal world. He was a great Tao Supreme, but there was actually something he could not see through. While the Heavenly Tao Sage was shocked by the mysterious pillar of light, 3 lines of notifications appeared in front of Hanju. Detected that the Tao Creator's power has entered the chaos. You have the following choices. 1. Go and destroy this power immediately and promote the dominance of the primordial fiend celestial. You can obtain a primordial fragment, a great Tao fragment, a creation spirit stone, a heavenly Tao spirit stone, a supreme treasure, and the Tao Creator's hatred. 2. Cultivate in a low-profile manner and stay away from trouble. Avoid the attention of the Tao Creator for now. You can obtain a primordial fragment, a great Tao fragment, and a creation spirit stone. Tao Creator? Hanju's eyelids twitched. This was an existence he could not provoke. Although the reward for the first option was very generous, he could only choose the second option. Hanju silently made his choice. You chose to cultivate in a low-profile manner and stay away from trouble. You temporarily avoided the sharpness of the Tao Creator and obtained a primordial fragment, a great Tao fragment, and a creation spirit stone. Hanju immediately took out the creation spirit stone and chose a ball of fiend celestial chi to fuse with. His will jumped above the chaos and looked down at it, wanting to see where the power was. Soon, he was attracted by the heavenly Tao. There was an extremely bright light in the heavenly Tao. It was the brightest in the entire chaos and was extremely eye-catching. Hanju looked over. The light came from a mortal world. It was a child. The child was just born. His cries were loud and world-shattering. It was even more powerful than when Qinling was born. His cries shocked the entire world and terrified countless cultivators. Hanju discovered that he couldn't spy on this child. This child had a powerful force and there was a golden pattern between his eyebrows like a closed vertical eye. The powerful force came from the golden pattern. 1 quadrillion years of lifespan will be deducted. Do you want to continue? Continue. Chaotic consciousness, cultivation unknown, chaotic deity, above the great Tao, rules and order, unspeakable name. It was him. The first Tao Creator that Hanju learned about. This fellow finally couldn't take it anymore. Hanju continued to ask, why is the chaotic consciousness doing this? 1 quadrillion years of lifespan will be deducted. Do you want to continue? Continue. Hanju didn't enter the illusion. 4 words appeared in front of him. Chaotic change. Chaotic change? What was the meaning of this? Hanju pondered carefully. Could it be because of the recent changes in the chaos? Why didn't the chaotic consciousness target the ultimate god of punishment but throw its power into the heavenly Tao? Could it be that this fellow wanted to arouse the ultimate god's fear? He could hope him in with Hanju around. However, could he really be fearless if there was another Hanju? There was another possibility. The chaotic consciousness hoped that the chaos would be more chaotic. After all, there was still the ninth chaos above him. Hanju thought for a while and stopped thinking about it. In any case, he couldn't go against a Tao creator for now. Thus, he would pretend not to know about this. Currently, he had already gathered 9 great Tao fragments and could create another great Tao mystical power. Hanju fell into deep thought. After a long while, he had an idea. He didn't lack strange mystical powers now. It was better to create a powerful mystical power that was convenient to teach to disciples. He could create mystical powers, but he couldn't create a great Tao mystical power. He wanted to create an unparalleled mystical power that could be the signboard of the hidden sect. Others would know that they were a personal disciple of the hidden sect upon seeing this mystical power. Hanju took out the 9 great Tao fragments and fused them. A strong light burst out and illuminated the entire Taoist temple. In the mortal world, dozens of servants knelt in front of a dazzling palace. In front of them was a middle-aged man in a python-patterned golden robe walking back and forth with an anxious expression. At this moment, the palace door opened and an old woman came out with a kasaya. The middle-aged man hurriedly went up and asked nervously, "Is it intact?" His gaze landed on the swaddled baby and he immediately beamed. This baby's skin was fair and cute, unlike the skin of a newborn. Most importantly, the golden pattern between his eyebrows looked especially divine. The old woman smiled. "It's fine. The little prince's cries are so loud. He's really extraordinary." The middle-aged man had also heard it earlier. It was indeed deafening, causing him to panic. He thought that something had happened. He had children before this. When had their cries been so loud? The middle-aged man took his son with a smile. At this moment, a golden light shone down, startling the nearby servants. They crawled back. The middle-aged man was also shocked, but he still pretended to be calm. Everyone was shocked by his words. The middle-aged man trembled in excitement and asked carefully, "Immortal, are you serious?" Tao Lord Wudu smiled. "I'm not talking nonsense." Boom! Heavenly lightning exploded, startling everyone so much that they looked up. They saw dark clouds suddenly gather and surge ferociously, making them panic. A green dragon was churning in the thundercloud. It was a spectacular sight. The green dragon stretched out a dragon head that was larger than a palace and said, "This child is fated with our dragon race. He can inherit our inheritance." The middle-aged man was stunned. Tao Lord Wudu frowned and thought that it was troublesome. However, this was not the end. A white crane came from the east. On the back of the crane stood a fairy. She wore an exquisite Taoist robe and her long hair fluttered. "This child is a destined disciple of our Just school. Fellow Taoists, please don't fight with us." The Taoist-robed fairy's voice resounded through the world, extremely cold. All the mortals in front of the palace were stunned. They had never seen such a scene. At the same time, in the Universal Hall, the sages saw this scene. Ji Xianshan smiled. "These guys run really fast." The South Extreme Heavenly Venerate said, "I want to see whose disciple doesn't have good judgment and can sit still." The other sages laughed as well. They were secretly informing their disciples to rope in the mortal child favored by the mysterious force. Heavenly Venerate Xian Du frowned and felt uneasy. The foolish sword sage saw through his emotions and said, I can't see through it, but why worry since even the divine might heavenly sage isn't moving? Heavenly Venerate Xian-du felt that it made sense. How could Hanju sit by and watch if there was really a threat? Heavenly Venerate Xian-du said, this child's background is extraordinary. He had to be taught well no matter who obtains him. Don't let him take the evil path. The sages smiled and nodded. Heavenly Venerate Xian-du's words meant that he had given up on the opportunity to fight for this child. Great Sage Void Soul couldn't help but say, in my opinion, we should suppress it and seal it as soon as possible to prevent future trouble. In the third Dao field, Hanju finally opened his eyes after an unknown period of time. He had successfully created a new Great Dao mystical power. He named this mystical power the Divine Might Great Heaven Palm. This palm was ferocious. Any power, thing, and even rules could be destroyed. It only had the power to destroy. It was absolutely destroyed and could not be repaired. Hanju began the simulation trial and challenged 10,000 foolish sword sages. He only used the Divine Might Great Heaven Palm. He used his domineering dermic powers and killed 10,000 foolish sword sages with a single palm. It was very easy. He continued to challenge more foolish sword sages. He fought with 20,000 foolish sword sages before finally winning. Hanju suddenly had a better idea. He used the Dharma Idol fusion technique to fuse with 2,449 fiend celestial Dharma idols before using the Divine Might Great Heaven Palm. 20,000 foolish sword sages were insta-killed. Hanju's confidence multiplied. He challenged his limits again. 25,000 foolish sword sages. He killed all of them with a single palm strike after using the Dharma Idol fusion technique and the Divine Might Great Heaven Palm. Previously, he had always used the Dharma Idol fusion technique to wield the Primordial Judgment Sword. However, the Primordial Judgment Sword was only a Dharma treasure, after all. It was more powerful if he used a Dharma treasure to wield a mystical power. Hanju decided to create another Great Dao mystical power regarding the Sword Dao next time. He didn't do it this time because the Sword Dao couldn't bypass Laozi. How could the hidden sect base itself on the Sword Dao? Hanju continued the simulation trial. In the end, he could no longer insta-kill the foolish sword sages when the number reached 30,000. He could only win after a fierce battle. The Divine Might Great Heaven Palm was definitely the most domineering palm technique mystical power he had ever seen. This would be the hidden sect's ultimate technique from now on. Hanju immediately came to the second Dao field and preached the Dao to all the fiend celestials, teaching them the Divine Might Great Heaven Palm. The chaotic fiend celestials were all people with powerful bodies and were not good at using Dharma treasures. Most of them liked to rely on their physical talent. Thus, they were very suitable for the Divine Might Great Heaven Palm. 100 years later, Hanju came to the 100-peak Immortal River and asked Han Zuetian to choose 10 geniuses of the hidden sect. Several days later, Han Zuetian brought 10 pseudo-sage geniuses over. They represented the sect's hope. Hanju encouraged them. The 10 geniuses were extremely excited. They kept kowtowing and paying respects to the ancestor. He also harvested a wave of 6-star favorability, and there were no traitors with low stars or hatred. These geniuses' talent was still a little lacking. They only learned it after Hanju preached for 1,000 years. Hanju especially reminded them that this was a secret technique of the hidden sect and could not be taught to outsiders. The 10 geniuses were even more excited, feeling that they had been acknowledged by their ancestor. Hanju waved his hand for them to leave. He didn't leave immediately. Instead, he looked at the immortal world and the person who had obtained the chaotic consciousness power. Azure Heaven Mystic. As. This was not his original name. He changed his name after stepping into cultivation. He even severed all karma with the mortal world. Azure Heaven Mystic was proud and arrogant. He was famous in the heavenly race. He received high treatment in the two worlds with the heavenly race's power. Hanju smiled when he learned of this. It would indeed be a waste if this kid couldn't attain the Tao in 30,000 years with the Tao creator's inheritance. Hanju began to observe Azure Heaven Mystic. Azure Heaven Mystic was extremely talented, but his personality was also extreme. At first, the sages who did not obtain Azure Heaven Mystic were very disappointed, but they were gloating now. Hanju saw that Azure Heaven Mystic was bullying his fellow disciples. This fellow challenged 10,000 immortal emperors alone. He even humiliated them after attaining victory. He was extremely arrogant. The humiliated immortal emperors didn't dare to say anything. They couldn't defeat him and could only endure. This was not the first time. Ha 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 ha, you immortal emperors have cultivated for tens of thousands of years and finally entered the cycle of reincarnation. You don't need to cultivate as mortals. Can you really repay the heavenly race for nurturing you? I would definitely demote all of you to the mortal world to prevent you from embarrassing the heavenly race if I were the heavenly ancestor. A blue-robed youth smiled proudly on a vast platform. 10,000 immortal emperors lying within a radius of 1,000,000 kilometers. All of them were red in the face and trembling. The blue-robed youth was Azure Heaven Mystic. He was handsome and had a tall figure. His waist was wrapped in a pearl ribbon and he wore cloud boots. He wore a vermilion bird headband and looked like an immortal who had walked out of a painting. A group of heavenly race immortals flew over at this moment. One of the fairies reprimanded him. Azure Heaven Mystic, don't humiliate your fellow disciples. Azure Heaven Mystic glanced at her and said disdainfully, You little girl, what are you shouting for? Come down and fight me one-on-one if you have the guts. Watch as I, the Emperor Realm, trample on your deity realm and let you, a high and mighty fairy, cry for mercy under my feet. The immortals around the fairy were indignant and cursed. Azure Heaven Mystic was not angry. Instead, he laughed even more wildly. Azure Heaven Mystic laughed wildly. He actually had the upper hand as he bickered with the other party alone. Hanju shook his head and laughed. He couldn't be bothered to do anything. After all, a Tao creator was behind him. He didn't hate Azure Heaven Mystic much. Although this person had a foul mouth and was arrogant, he did not kill his fellow disciples. It was worth mentioning that even though Azure Heaven Mystic was so famous, he did not have a single life in his hands. He hadn't even killed worms or plants. He wouldn't step on flowers if he saw them when this kid was young. He would fly if he could. In a sense, Azure Heaven Mystic was the cleanest person in the world. Hanju stopped looking at him. He teleported to the third Tao field and called Han Qing'er into the Taoist temple. Father, what is it? Han Qing'er raised her eyebrows and asked in high spirits. Hanju said, I recently created a mystical power. It will be the signature mystical power of the hidden sect in the future. Do you want to learn it? Han Qing'er curled her lips. How powerful can a temporarily created mystical power be? Teach me some ancient mystical power. Thinking highly of ancient creations and belittling modern works. This was the same for all races. Hanju smiled faintly. Why don't you try in the dream? Han Qing'er hurriedly shook her head. I'll learn. I'll learn. Hanju immediately preached the Tao and taught the mystical power. The lecture ended 200 years later. Han Qing'er opened her eyes in shock. There's actually such a mystical power in the world. It's as exquisite and profound as the great Tao. Han Qing'er looked at her father in admiration. Hanju was secretly pleased. This palm is too ferocious. Don't use it unless it's a life and death battle, especially against the disciples in the Tao field. Hanju reminded, afraid that she would act recklessly. Han Qing'er nodded. Don't worry, father. I know what to do. I'm not an arrogant and reckless person. Hanju smiled and nodded. For some reason, he thought of Azure Heaven Mystic. His arrogance was indeed the highest he had ever seen. He didn't know if it was intentional. He was so arrogant, but there was no karma. It was very strange. Han Qing'er was very surprised and immediately went forward. The current simulation trial had already copied many experts of all realms, including hidden sect disciples. Several hours later, Han Qing'er opened her eyes and said excitedly, Father, what mystical power is this? It's so realistic. It's even more realistic than a dream. Hanju said, it contains either hidden sect disciples or enemies I've encountered before. It's enough for you to use for countless years. Han Qing'er nodded and left. She returned to her mother's side and continued to immerse herself in the simulation trial. She looked like an internet addict. Hanju didn't find it funny. After all, his personal disciples were the same back then. They were addicted for hundreds of years or even longer before returning to normal. Then, Hanju closed his eyes and continued cultivating. Heavenly Tao, outside the 33rd heaven. In the Heavenly Ancestor Palace, Ji Xianshan stared at the immortals in the hall with a dark expression. They were all heavenly race immortals. I asked you to teach Azure Heaven Mystic well, but now, such a joke has happened. Who's responsible for this? Ji Xianshan asked coldly as he scanned everyone. The immortals looked at each other. No one replied. Ji Xianshan said coldly, bring me Azure Heaven Mystic. I want to teach him personally. No immortal god refused. They agreed. Ji Xianshan was annoyed. He immediately waved his sleeve and gestured for all the immortals to leave. Although the heavenly race was huge, they did not have any useful immortals. He couldn't help but think of the hidden sect. Should he ask Li Xianniao to send him some geniuses? The hidden sect had the deepest foundation in the entire immortal world. There were countless geniuses and their forces covered the heavenly Tao. Ji Xianshan closed his eyes and cultivated after the immortals left. Several days later, an immortal god brought Azure Heaven Mystic into the hall and bid farewell. Only Ji Xianshan and Azure Heaven Mystic were left in the hall. Ji Xianshan sized him up and was increasingly satisfied. It had to be said that this kid was indeed talented. Perhaps he could really catch up to his master. Azure Heaven Mystic said proudly, why did the sage summon me? Could it be that you want to take me in as your disciple? I've already acknowledged a master and will never acknowledge a second master. Although the sage is far stronger than my master, I can't forget my roots. Ji Xianshan smiled. Why should I be your master? I'm your ancestor. Azure Heaven Mystic was stunned. Although the heavenly race had sages, they were not of the same lineage. He didn't expect his master to be the disciple of a sage. He immediately bowed and said, greetings, ancestor. Ji Xianshan asked, you clearly have great kindness in your heart. Why are you so arrogant and trampling on the dignity of others? Azure Heaven Mystic looked up. Ancestor, I can't stand those people. They bully the weak and stick together. I like to target geniuses. I want to see who in the world has greater talent than me. His face was still filled with arrogance. Ji Xianshan was helpless. They would have long died if anyone else dared to speak to a sage like this. This kid was the only one who said that others were bullying people because of their strength and talent, but he did the same thing himself. You'll cultivate in my Tao field for 10,000 years before returning to the immortal world, Ji Xianshan said seriously. He already had a plan. He wanted Azure Heaven Mystic to participate in the chaotic assembly. Azure Heaven Mystic hesitated for a moment and said, all right. Thank you, ancestor. Silencio waved his right hand and a mat landed in front of him. Azure Heaven Mystic understood and walked forward to sit down. Time passed quickly. 10,000 years passed in the blink of an eye. In the past 10,000 years, other than cultivating Tao techniques, Silencio had also taught him many mystical powers. Azure Heaven Mystic flew out of the Heavenly Ancestor Palace. He had changed into a white robe and had a heroic figure. His temperament was extraordinary. One could feel the aura of a prodigy just by looking at his figure. He didn't leave the 33rd heaven immediately but wandered nearby. The 33rd heaven was vast, with dozens of Tao field. As he flew, he occasionally encountered Tao seekers who looked at him in surprise. He was tempting fate. Azure Heaven Mystic didn't know what they were thinking and did not disturb them. Azure Heaven Mystic bent down and rushed towards the immortal world after walking through all the sage Tao field. A figure sped over and stopped him after passing through more than 10 layers of sky. It was a beautiful woman in a purple-red immortal dress. Her hair was slightly messy, and spots of blood could be seen on her body. She looked terrified. "Fellow Taoist, please save me," the woman said anxiously. Azure Heaven Mystic frowned. The woman said, "I'm a heavenly Tao immortal god. I offended the disciples of the Jia school. They're chasing after me." Azure Heaven Mystic said, "Oh. I'll definitely thank you in the future as long as you can save me. Get lost." The woman in the immortal dress was stunned. At this moment, more than 10 disciples of the Jia school flew over on their swords. "Demon, where are you running to?" shouted angrily the middle-aged man in the lead holding a pagoda. Then, a green light shot out from the pagoda towards Azure Heaven Mystic and the woman. Azure Heaven Mystic's eyes narrowed. He turned around, and a vertical eye opened between his brows. Golden light shot out from his eyes and destroyed the green light of the pagoda. "Who are you? How dare you stop the Jia school?" the middle-aged man asked angrily. The other disciples stopped and waited. The woman in the immortal dress said anxiously, "Fellow Taoist, they are after my Dharma treasure. You have to save." Azure Heaven Mystic turned around and slapped her before she could finish speaking, causing her to vomit blood and fly out, piercing through the clouds. Azure Heaven Mystic said disdainfully, "Nonsense. Don't wander the immortal world if you don't have the ability." He turned to look at the group of the Jia school disciples and said, "I hate people who bully others the most. It's your fate to meet me today. I'll teach you a lesson. Come at me together."